I'm Eric.
And I'm Chad.
And this is Manly Meals. All right, guys, welcome back. Yes, we're doing a new series. So you guys are probably familiar with our self-reliance thing we've been doing. We talked about like ham radios and loadout kits and things like that, first aid, lots of useful things. And we did sort of a intro type of video on pressure canning, all right, early on. So we thought that we would integrate this into a little bit of a series. We're going to go through and do epic things. We're going to show you a lot of self-reliance, not only in the kitchen, culinary type stuff, but we're going to be doing some like really cool cast iron restorations that we find these really awesome things when we're out in our travels. So we're going to do some restoration, old to new. That'll be kind of cool. Self-reliance, different recipes, burning all kinds of meat, barbecue, brisket, anything that goes on the grill, we're going to be diving into it.
Yeah, Eric's more of the grill master. I'm more of the, stay inside and cook in the kitchen, as you can tell.
All right, so today what we're going to be messing around with is taking a deer that was in the woods, alive, and putting it into
a jar.
A jar.
So with pressure canning, it is the only safe method for canning meat, all right? And this is per like USDA standards. If you guys don't know what canning is, go back and refer to our self-reliance episode on the subject. We laid out a lot of groundwork as far as preserving food in jars using heat, okay? And this is shelf-stable food that will last a very, very long time, just like the canned goods you buy from the grocery store, but you canned it yourself so you know what's going into it, and if you grew it yourself, you really have a way to control all the nutrition that your family needs. But we're going to pressure can some deer today, and we've got a little bit of a spread here. We've got our All-American 921. All right, this will hold 19 pints at a time, okay, pressure canning. We've got an Instant Pot going with our broth to keep it nice and hot. We've got a Vollrath induction burner over here, what we're cooking our meat on. We're going to show you guys all these steps leading up to getting this product completed. But needless to say, before you get started, obviously you're going to need a few supplies, canning jars, lids, rings. You're going to want to clean those jars really well. Just hand washing will be fine for pressure canning because the pressure canning process is going to sterilize the jars. Okay, when you get into water bath canning, that's when you really need to sterilize your jars as well because you're only going up to boiling temperatures. Pressure canning can get up to 250 degrees depending on what elevation you're canning at. So it's going to kill off any of those nasties. It'll cause botulism and any other kind of illness. But get your jars in the oven at 200 degrees. That'll dry them out. That'll get them nice and warm for the further process, but we're going to move on from here.
Man, Chad and I knew that a lot of people are going to be looking into all of this pressure canning and stuff. So if you're tuning into this video, well, hopefully you're happy that this is the first Manly Meals episode and not the last. But also, I know there's a lot of people looking for instruction on pressure canning, so this video really is intended to be instructional and giving you guys an idea. It can be a little intimidating at first.
It can be, for sure.
But it's really not. Once you get the basic equipment, now there are different types of pressure canners out there in terms of quality level and everything. It's worth noting that the All-American, these are pretty pricey, but they pretty much are the industry standard for at-home canners.
Well, they're definitely a little bit notch above like what the Prestos are. These do not feature any sort of seal in them. It has a taper seal, so it's all metal contact. So these things will last a lifetime without needing any replacement parts. The Prestos are a good value. I've used a Presto for years and years and years. My grandmother used a Presto for years. You do have to replace the seals every now and again, and they are a much more affordable option. Really, no matter what canner you're using, the process is still going to be the exact same. All right, we're going to make some broth here. We've got our Better Than Bouillon, roughly about 1.5 tablespoons per quart. And we are running 1 gallon of water in here. So we got plenty of broth to get through this whole canning process because we're going to be doing quite a bit today. Basically, when you start getting low, you'll just top this off as you need. Now, if you've got bone broth, obviously, like either from venison or beef, that would be a better alternative, but the Better Than Bouillon is quite good and it's readily available right at the store and you don't have to go through the whole process of stinking up your kitchen to make bone broth. We'll let that sit in the Instant Pot for a while and just let it stay at a simmer because we want everything going into the jars nice and hot. All right, so once you get all your prep work done, it's time to get started on the meat. We've got some onions and some peppers here that we diced up. They're going to go in the pot. We're going to add a little bit more olive oil in there. You want a little extra fat with this ground venison because it's a very lean meat. So we're going to saute these veggies for a minute and then we're going to start adding our venison in.
Looking good.
Oh, mama.
It was in the woods, now it's in the pan.
All right, so we're going to want to get the venison just slightly browned, basically to where you don't have any more large clumps of meat in there, where it's kind of starting to look a little bit more fine like regular ground meat. And then we'll proceed to pack it into our jars, and we'll show you guys that process. Easy as pie. Well, easy as venison.
Just stop.
Bye.
Well, while we're waiting on things to happen, let's go ahead and break open a bottle of the Federalist. Look at that. Oh, Benjamin Franklin on the label. It must be good. I've got a corkscrew in his head right now. I might pull his brain out. Let's see. All right.
Well, they say red wine goes with red meat.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, a little wine. And I don't pour like a waiter or whatever, you know. Glug, 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 glug. It's about even. There you go. All right.
All right, so to prepare your canner, you're going to go ahead and just put 2.5 to 3 inches of water in the bottom. Go ahead and put your grate in there. The grate is there for the safety of the jars. You don't want the jars resting on the bottom of the pan because it could lead to breakage. You don't want the bottom of the jars on that direct heat source. So they need to be elevated just slightly. We're going to go ahead and get the stove running at about medium heat to bring the water up to a simmer inside, just to get it prepped and nice and hot. Since you're putting hot jars with hot contents into the canner, you don't want to have cold water in there because that can lead to jar breakage as well. You want everything to be nice and warm when it goes into the canner. Now, if you happen to be raw packing jars and you're not using hot jars, then you'd want to start with a cold canner and then bring the heat up from there gradually, just to minimize any risk of jar breakage.
Just a word of caution, if you're going to use a glass stovetop, some glass stovetop manufacturers advise against pressure canning. Check with your manufacturer to make sure that your particular stovetop can be used for pressure canning. And there is a such thing as a glass ceramic composite. This is a Maytag unit that has the composite stovetop. And also, before you put your pressure canner on your glass stovetop, if your manufacturer does recommend using a pressure canner, check with the manufacturer. Make sure the bottom of the pressure canner is clean. No bits of dust or dirt or a little bit of sand or anything, because it will scratch the mess out of the top of this thing. We're waiting on this other stuff, so we're probably about, we'll have to wait about 4 more glasses of wine. We'll be ready.
All right, so this is what you're looking for with your ground meat. You want it to be about halfway done roughly, but as you can see, it's nice and separated. It's not in large chunks, okay? So this is going to pack in the jars very nicely, and you've got your onions and your peppers in there. We just add those for a little bit of extra flavor. So now we're going to proceed to pack the jars. And then with the hot pack method, you use broth in there to help keep that meat nice and tender, and also helps with the cooking process as well. And it leads to a higher quality product, you know, in long-term storage, which is what this is going to be. Also, guys, remember, venison is a very lean meat. So you really don't need to worry about draining the excess fat off. You do want a little bit of that fat in the jar. It'll just help with the flavor. All right, so now you take your hot broth and go ahead and top your jars up to the proper headspace level, which is right about 1.25 inches. Now, headspace is important for the sealing of the jar after the processing is done, because you have that airspace in there. During the processing, the oxygen and the other air and such is pushed out of the jar, and then as it's cooled, that vacuum is created, and that's what keeps the flat pulled down and keeps the jar sealed for long-term storage. If you have too much headspace, then the processing time may not be adequate to push all of the air out and create a substantial vacuum. If you have too little headspace, you could get your product overflowing in the pressure canner. The headspace is there for a reason. Follow the headspace guidance for this pressure canning process.
Not operator headspace.
Not operator headspace.
Well, it can be if you don't follow the directions.
After topping the jars off with hot broth, you're going to take your ball tool here, and you're just going to kind of poke around the outside of the jar, and that's going to release any air bubbles in there. If you have air remaining in your jars, that will add to the headspace, and it could cause a potential jar failure, as I mentioned before. So after this process, we'll put just a little bit more broth on top to bring that headspace back up to the proper level. All right, while Eric is throwing some of our stew meat into the pan here so we can get a full load on this canner. I'm going to take a paper towel that's got a little bit of hot water on it, and we're just going to wipe the rims. You want to make sure there's no food particles or grease or anything like that on the rims of the jars. That could lead to a jar failure as well, and a sealing failure. Easy process that some people tend to forget, and then they run into problems once they finish processing. We've got our clean flats, and this may sound crazy, but I have had flats that do not have the plastisol sealant on them, so you have to watch out. You might have a flat every now and again that does not have the plastisol on it. That's the sealing compound. So we just drop our flats onto our jars.
And I'm unceremoniously washing a pan in the background and drinking wine.
Now our rings. Now the rings just go on fingertip tight. That's all you need. And you will not touch these rings again until after everything is cooled down and you're ready to actually store these jars of venison.
Looking good. Now people are probably asking, well, how is this a manly meal, Eric and Chad? I thought this was manly meals. This looks Martha meals. Well, the answer, boys and girls, canning is manly, because what's more manly than going out in the woods hunting with your grandpa and opening up one of these and eating it with a fork cold out of the jar like a man.
All right, so we got some stew meat in here. We're going to follow the same process we did with the ground. We're going to cook it about half to 2/3 of the way. Fill the jars up, put some broth in there. You can add a little bit of salt to the mix if you wish. Me personally, there's enough salt in the broth that we use for my taste, and you can always add salt after it's cooked. It's not necessary for the preservation process. But anyways, we're going to follow the same method here, and we're going to get all these 19 jars in the canner in just a moment.
See the marks that are left behind from the jars that go up here on the top level. When we put this middle piece in here, you just want to make sure that all the lids of the jars kind of interlock like that. Okay, so make sure all the lids of the jars are within the lip, and then you're going to just go ahead and stack the next batch of jars on top. So I've got 10 more jars. This time we're running ground. It's okay to mix your product, so if you've got, you know, stew chunks or whatever, as long as the time in your manual is the same for each product.
All right, Eric is going to drop the lid on the 921 here, lock it into place.
You can see the arrow lines up with the notch right there. All right, and the way you're going to tighten this lid is pretty much like tightening lugs on your tire, right? You don't tighten here, here, and here and work your way around. You go across each way, just like a tire, and you just want to check and make sure that it's relatively level all the way across the top as close as you can get it. So we'll just, you know, this side looks like it's favoring kind of low already, so we'll start on the opposite side and just start putting a little bit of pressure on that lid like that, and see how it sort of lifted up the other side. We'll do the same thing over here. Okay, that didn't require a whole lot. That looks like those are about even. I'm not putting a ton of pressure on there just yet. All right, we're gonna do the same thing. Look across these. This side looks a little low, so this side we'll pull down first, okay? Yeah, see how it's pulled it down just a little bit. That's fine. I can tighten this and then look at the other side. That's pretty close, and then we'll tighten this one down. And then the same thing, we'll look across this axis, and we're gonna look, and it's pretty even already, so we'll just start on the side that looks like it might favor just a little bit higher, and go ahead and bring that down a bit. And then we'll go through and check everything. We'll start back where we started, look across. That looks good. So just give it like about 1/8 of a turn, a little bit more. You'll feel it kind of, don't monkey tight, but you know, pretty good bit of force. All right, same thing across the back. Looks pretty freaking good right there. Give it a little bit of a turn. That one's already kind of tight. It's good. And then looking across here, that side might be a scotch high, but I think if we just give that one final crank right there, that brought it down nice and even. I think that looks nice. You just want to make sure there's an even gap all the way across the lid.
All right, the canner itself has come up to temperature. We're going to let it vent for about 7 to 10 minutes, okay? What that's going to do is just allow all these jars in here to kind of come up to an even temperature and such before we drop this petcock on and get this pressure building up in here. All right, at this point we can drop the petcock in place. Now at our elevation we're using 10 pounds of pressure in this weighted gauge. If you are at a higher elevation you may have to use 15 pounds of pressure. You'll just have to check your canning manual for the proper weight on this weighted gauge canner if that's what you're using, or if you're using a dial gauge canner, what pressure you're supposed to actually operate at. We're going to drop the petcock in place, and then basically this is going to hold all the pressure into the vessel here, and we're going to see the pressure start to rise on the dial over here. Once it comes up to pressure, the petcock will start to wobble. We'll turn the heat down to medium, and then we'll time our iteration for 75 minutes for these pints. Our petcock is venting pressure. We are at just over 11 pounds. We're going to turn our heat down to about medium here. What you want is this petcock to vent the pressure about once to 4 times every minute or so. So I found that about medium heat is a good happy medium. You won't burn out all the water in your canner, and you'll be able to go the full processing time. So now we're just going to set our timer for 75 minutes, and we will see you guys in an hour and 15.
We have takeoff. All right, time's up. We're gonna turn the eye off and let the temperature come down in the cooker, and the pressure will also drop as the temperature comes down. All right, so burner's off. Let it cool down. Our pressure's gotten well here to 0. Give the petcock a little spin. All right, if it shoots steam out or it bubbles any, then you know there's still pressure in there. In this case, no evaporation or steam, anything's coming out. We know that it's safe to lift. Now it's gonna be really hot. Make sure you use some gloves or whatever. And then at this point, all you wanna do is just loosen all of these knobs and just break the seal and let it sit here and cool off a few more minutes. All right, we're gonna go ahead and remove our jars. Leave a little bit of space in between them. Not too much, but you can leave, you know, half an inch or so, maybe an inch, depending on how much space you've got. We're just gonna set them here on a towel. Help insulate them a little bit. You don't want them to cool down too quick. You want it to be kind of a gradual cooling, and you'll hear these flats start to pop as these things form a seal, about like that. And if you've got a little bit of water on the top of the flat, like the one I just pulled out, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but there's some water on there. As soon as we get all the jars out, we'll just take a paper towel and just gently lap up that water. You don't want that water to sit on there. All right, we got our stew meat that came out from the bottom there. That's looking real nice. If the jars have the contents all bubbling and boiling still, that's fine. That's completely normal. These things are pretty hot. Some of that water that gets trapped on the lids will evaporate, but you want to go ahead and just take a dry cloth and don't tilt the jars and let the water run off of the lid. You want to go ahead and allow that to just sit there and leave the jars completely in the upright position. I know it's tempting to want to spill the water off, but we're going to wipe it off with a dry cloth. Gently, just allow it to kind of sop up a little bit of the water like that. Don't push the lid when you do it. Just let the paper towel just kind of sop the water up. And then the heat from the jar will allow most of that other liquid to evaporate, okay? It'll be fine.
This is from a previous iteration. This is some ground venison that we did about a month ago. Now, you're gonna let these jars sit here overnight, okay? At least 24 hours. just undisturbed. And they're going to completely cool down to room temperature. They're going to seal 100%. After that 24-hour period, just go through and just kind of tap the top of your lids and just make sure that they're pulled down. You can hear one popping in the background. That's that lid pulling down with that vacuum inside the jar. That means you've got a really, really good solid seal, and that is not going to go anywhere for a good long time. If you so choose, you can pull the rings off and just store them just like this. I mean, as you can see, we've got a good vacuum seal on this old jar here. I mean, I'm holding it by the lip of the lid itself, and the jar is pulling down. It is a good solid vacuum. Or you can store these with the rings just slightly pulled away. Okay, some people prefer not to stack them. Some people prefer to stack them in the original containers. You can do that. However you want to store them, it's your prerogative. But needless to say, your venison is good and ready to go.
From the forest to the jar. Here you go.
From
all
the
right,
forest to the jar.
We hope you enjoyed the first episode of Manly Meals. All right, we're going to have more things coming. I promise some cast iron restoration. We've got this monster right here. Okay, this is a big old cowboy cast iron skillet from around 1945, 1946, late 40s. It is rather thin, so it's going to present a bit of a challenge. We do have some rust and scale, but we're going to go through and clean this thing up, and we're going to take it all the way from a rusty old cowboy skillet to cowboy cooking.
I don't know. I mean, might be able to make like 10 pounds of bacon, like 2 dozen eggs. I don't know.
Yeah.
15 pounds of sausage.
This is a big boy here. Yeah, the handle on this thing's about 20 inches long, and it's about a 16 and a half, 17-inch skillet. So big boy there. All right, many more on the way. Appreciate the support. Have a good one.
See you guys next time.